Summertime is when Kingston really shines. The streets and waterfront open to waves of pedestrians, enjoying the sights, sounds, and tastes the city has to offer. And outdoor events pop up on every corner, including more than a few music festivals. This is Kingston Live, and today we're talking with three representatives from a festival in the region that has been promoting peace, community, and art for 50 years. Blue Skies Music Festival has been hosting artists and music lovers since the early 70s in the small town of Clarendon. And since the beginning, they've been committed to their non-commercial, community-centric approach. The festival is entirely volunteer-organized and operated, covering everything from bookings to cooking. There are no vendors or sales on the grounds. And since 2015, Blue Skies has been completely garbage-free. It's a different type of festival, where it's common for guests and performers alike to pitch in where they can, while enjoying great music and a beautiful campsite. And Blue Skies Music Festival is only part of what the organization does. Since 1988, Blue Skies in the community has supported the arts year-round through a variety of initiatives in Kingston, Perth, and beyond. From summer arts day camps for children and adults alike, to offering funding for music lessons, workshops, and concerts. Hello, I'm John. This is Kingston Live, and I'm joined by three members of the Blue Skies Music Festival. Maybe we can start. You can just introduce yourselves and tell us what your role is in all of this.
Well, I'm Oskar Graf. I'm one of the co-founders of the festival. At this point, I am not that much actively involved in the festival anymore. I've retired. My part is, I think, a lot of the history of the place in the early years.
My name's Kate Thomas, and I joined the organizing group in 1986, just helping out in different areas in the festival, putting the festival on.
My name is Dale Driver. I joined the organization in 1999 and have volunteered in various ways since then.
Very good. Welcome to Kingston Live.
Thank you.
Now, I'm very interested in all of this. I've never attended the Blue Skies Festival, but I've certainly heard of it, and I'm sure that some of our listeners are in a similar situation. And this is the 50th anniversary of the festival, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, that's kind of amazing, actually. Now, I know our producer, Rob, he described it to me as like a mini Woodstock. Is that correct? Is that accurate?
We never lived up to that. Sorry to say. Basically, no, I don't think we even had ambitions to be a mini Woodstock. Yes, there were a lot of hippies involved. Yes, there were a lot of tie-dye shirts involved. But that doesn't make us to be the same thing as Woodstock was.
Okay, so what is it then, if it's its own thing?
Well, no, I think in the philosophy, Canadians are different than Americans. That's how it starts. So when we got together as the folks that moved back to the land up north of Highway 7, it's a different bunch than was behind the Woodstock world. Yes, so we invited, a bunch of folk musicians to come and play. It was totally ad hoc. And we had no ambitions of size or scope of those big festivals.
Okay, so paint the picture for me then. What's it like there? What's happening? What's going on?
Well, I don't know how much we want to get into the history of it or how much we want to go into what's going on today.
Well, I think what I'm getting at, we can cover some of the history, but I guess what I'm getting at is, how does it feel? How do you want people to feel when they're there? How do you want people to feel when they leave?
Welcomed, I guess. It's very relaxed, and there's a feeling of coming in the road and over the hill and looking at the little stage area that makes people feel like they've come home. There's people who've been coming for every year, and there's people who come for the first time and can't wait to come back. It's one of our funny background stories is that if a family separates, the kids are fighting between who gets who for Christmas and who gets to come to Blue Skies. So the organization is run on a non-hierarchical kind of balance, and everyone is a volunteer. No one is paid except the musicians, and we work together to bring music and community to about 2,000 people every year.
I think our big thing right from the start is that we always wanted to be non-commercial. So there is no sales on the festival. We do everything in-house, from the food to everything. So that adds a completely different thing. And yes, it's totally volunteer run. It gives a very different flavor to the big festivals. And it's a camping festival, so a lot of people, more than half, 3/4 are actually staying on site. And we ask our musicians to be on site for the whole festival. So again, that's the whole idea of community and being together for, that long weekend adds to a completely different thing. And we are far enough off the beaten track up there in Clarendon that it isn't, we are not influenced by like having a festival in the park in the city or anything like that.
Well, it's funny because I feel, because it is outside of the city, and when we're talking about having you on the podcast, I almost felt like this was slightly out of our jurisdiction to talk about. But yeah, it is in the area. And you touched on something that I wanted to talk about. One of my questions here, actually. Blue Skies is completely self-organized. As I understand, there's no company, there's no staff or employees, no security or even electricity. Is that correct?
Oh, that's quite.
Well, there are different issues here, right?
Okay.
No, yes, it is the volunteer organization, and yes, the only people that are getting paid are the musicians. Still is, always has been. We do now charge for admission. Originally, that was a way to try to control the numbers. If you sell a ticket, then you can we only sell so many tickets, right? That is a means of control, and also a means of having a budget. But yes, we're trying to always have been trying to be self-sufficient. Eventually, we did end up with some small grants from Ontario Arts Council, but for the longest time, we ran it totally out of our own resources. Again, that adds a very different flavor to a festival that doesn't have sponsors.
Well, and it's amazing that you've been able to do that for 50 years now. That's quite incredible. And I want to go back to, we touched on the history a little bit. So how did this get started? What was the first Blue Skies festival?
Well, there was a community of people that have moved out to the land in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. And before even the festival started, we found each other and created some sort of a cohesion there, in that we had gatherings that brought people together, and even create a little bit of a newsletter for all that alternative community people that lived there. So starting the festival was really an idea of sort of celebrating our life up there together and creating a connection with the local folks, the old, the people that lived there forever. Because we felt, most of us, that, we've been sort of adopted by local families in some way that showed us a bit of the ways of how to live in the country. And it was a way to connect those two pieces. It definitely was, like, the early years were totally free. There was no admission charge. We just worked with donations. And that whole idea of living with basically local resources without any funding, creating it out of our own energy and ingenuity and all that, that was very important. And it created it. And the first sound systems were, somebody had the equipment and we had a generator and we built a stage, and, very, very low key, very, what community had to come together to make it happen. Everybody who came had to pitch in and be a volunteer. Otherwise, it wouldn't have happened. And that spirit is still there. Yeah. It's totally amazing. I find that over the years, those essence things have been maintained. And I think that makes it a totally, totally different atmosphere than any other festival.
Has it been hard to keep it like that? Or is it just sort of naturally grown that way?
Certainly the pandemic presented some challenges. As Oskar and Kate have said, it's really, I've come to see it as a community of communities that do come together and put this on. So part of the challenge over the pandemic was to try and keep things as normal as we possibly could. So we adopted some new technologies. We met on Zoom. Some people were okay with that, some people not okay with that. But back to the volunteer and keeping it going, I don't know what keeps that going. Do you know how do we keep that volunteer? Because everybody volunteers at Blue Skies, everybody. Mm-hmm. If you attend, you're probably going to volunteer somewhere in some way.
Well, I imagine it might be kind of like Kingston Live, where it is volunteer run and it really is just people who believe in the cause that just sort of...
I mean, to me, it's kind of amazing. You come to this festival with your family or by yourself, and maybe you camp, and then you're asked to, hey, how about spending 3 hours on the road parking cars? How about spending time in the kitchen slicing vegetables and serving? How about cleaning outhouses? And all that gets done. Even security, those people are willing to spend the night making sure that nothing goes wrong and everybody's happy and safe and secure. We are a very friendly festival. We've never had to call the cops in 50 years.
That's amazing.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That shows how the thing works. But nevertheless, we do have a group of people that calls themselves security.
So it sounds like you've just been able to develop your own kind of culture that just naturally works.
We use the term consensus decision-making. We, as an organizing group of about 120 people who meet several times through the year, so maybe 5 or 6 times a year, those people get together and figure out what the details are and how to organize the festival. And we try to use a system of consensus decision-making where we discuss things and we try to make sure that everybody is on side with the decision that we've made about a certain factor, whatever it might be, price of tickets or color of T-shirt, or, we also give a sense of ownership or responsibility to each of the organizers in their specific little area. So we wouldn't necessarily tell the artistic director who they need to book, but the artistic director does share with people how they're hiring people or who they're hiring as it goes along. So there are about 30 areas where there is a key responsible person, and then that person has volunteers who help them as well. So it kind of is like a smaller group, and then it ripples out, and everybody feels a part of the festival by the time they get there.
We also have we call it an outreach program called Blue Skies in the Community. And that group very much feels like Kingston's in their catchment area. So we do a lot of work placing music into the schools. We will partner with a school to bring a performer in, and we would pay half of the fee for the musician to go into the school.
Okay.
So there have been a variety of performers who have taken advantage of that, or that we've, engaged to do that. And that is a year-round effort.
Mm-hmm.
This may be a question for Oskar. Where does the name Blue Skies come from?
Well, the whole name was actually the Clannon Blue Skies Music Festival. And it got shortened to just the Blue Skies. And, of course, you have a bunch of people come together, and what do we name it? And Blue Skies is very optimistic. That sounds like a good thing, And basically it was one person of the group who came up with a name, and it stuck. As I said, like we were right off the beginning, I called a meeting. Let's put together a festival. Who wants to be involved? And I said, we're a loose community of little sub-centers, you might say. There was, Brook Valley had already, they even had their own little school for the kids. So there was a bunch of people that lived there. There was people up in McDonald's Corners. All these communities are down here in Kingston, north of 7, a strange territory. You don't know anything that goes up there, right? so anyhow, there was, various little groups and individuals that came together and attended those early meetings very informally. And so that's where the names got started, and it stuck. And I think basically it's an optimistic kind of a name.
Sounds that way, yeah. It's definitely the vibe it gives off.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And, I think the idea that in the early days, yes, I mentioned, like the community with the people that lived there and integrating the folks that were there long before us. That's an important part. We were all part of the environmental, that's why we moved to the country. We were all part of notions of peace movements. And those things were very, very important. And I think that formed the philosophy of those early years and still does. Mm-hmm. I think that's still very important. So to come together in a peaceful way also is there's a bit of we want to show the world that we can do that. We don't need a lot of money. We don't need policing. We can create a community that is peaceful and works together.
Well, and you've got 50 years of evidence to that point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So Dale mentioned the Blue Skies in the community. So to my understanding, it was the Blue Skies Cultural Center. And out of that as well was Blue Skies in the Community, which has grown, and an offshoot of Blue Skies in the Community, which does granting and musicians in schools and communities. And also they, for over 20 years now, have had the Fiddle Orchestra, which is managed by Cindy McCall up in the McDonald's Corners. And she has a beginner's fiddle orchestra, an intermediate, performing. It was a way initially, I believe, to that, as Oskar was talking about, the older generation who had been established in that area for many years. The older generation had been fiddlers, had been musicians, but the younger generations had not picked that up. And so Carolyn Stewart and some of the others wanted to see that music brought back to the community, to that next generation. And so they started the Fiddle Orchestra, very small, but it grew and grew and grew. And now, they've been down to Nova Scotia and played with fiddle groups down there, and they play in Maberly and McDonald's Corners, and it's quite a vibrant, exciting, strong group of people, all generations. There's kids and parents and grandparents all playing in the Fiddle Orchestra. And so that's an offshoot, and they're still affiliated with Blue Skies in the Community and therefore Blue Skies, but they do a lot of things on their own. One of the other things that we've had at Blue Skies as the festival has been a choir, and there's been a choir director, and people they've organized their whole weekend around the choir practices so they can perform at 7:00 on Sunday evening on the main stage to their families and the rest of the people at Blue Skies. And that choir has just been one of the things that has gelled at Blue Skies, and one of the I don't know if he was the original choir master, but he lives in Kingston, Andy Rush, and he said, well, why don't we try doing that in town, in Kingston? And he put out a call and he said, let's have auditions. And he organized to have it in a small location, and hundreds of people showed up, and he had to move to a larger location just to do the auditions. And that choir is not in any way affiliated with Blue Skies, but it was a kernel of what happens at Blue Skies, is people coming together and wanting to share the joy of voice and music. And so Open Voices Choir is a very happening event here in Kingston because of a connection to Blue Skies way back in the day.
That's great.
It's just little pieces, kernels of things. We have a kids camp that is organized by Blue Skies in the community, and that's a whole week, a day camp at the Blue Skies site for 50 children who, as many as possible, come from the northern communities. There's a bursary program for families who can't afford to send their kids to camp, and they have music and arts and crafts and leadership training, and it's an incredible growth experience for so many kids over the years. And that's been happening for over 20 years now. And 4 years ago, we started an adult music camp. So that's an actual camping for 3 days on the site if people wish. They don't have to. And we have an experience for people to come and just have an instructor for a small group of people and play music and have choir and campfire songs. And so that's another thing that's kind of under the umbrella of Blue Skies in the Community, which is under the umbrella of the Blue Skies Music Festival Cultural Center. And the common theme is music, but the common theme is also coming together and being in a place where there's no kind of judgment about levels of skill or whatever. It's just to have fun and play music.
Thank you for listening to Kingston Live. Be sure to subscribe on your platform of choice and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. For more great Kingston music, check out the Kingston Live playlist on Spotify. For show listings, artist info, and all things Kingston music, check out kingstonlive.ca.
Another question I had, and I think you've almost answered this already. I'm curious about the musicians performing at the festival. What do you feel what kind of musical act do you feel is a good fit for this festival? What do you look for?
Dale's the past artistic director, so what do you think?
Well, I would, I guess, answer that obliquely, perhaps. It's the Blue Skies Music Festival, so there isn't any one genre of music that fits. We've had all kinds of different music on the stage. I think a bit like Duke Ellington apparently claimed, there's really only two kinds of music. There's good music and bad music. So Blue Skys is for good music. Like, it's not a folk festival. It's not it's not always, electronica festival.
Yeah, I think we would try to stick with, quote, live music, like performed music. I would say definitely heavier on the acoustic than the electric. Mm-hmm. But yes, we've had some pretty good boogie bands. We've had some pretty good dance events, But I would say mainly acoustic. It would be the thing, not necessarily strict folk. Even so, I would think that's maybe the major part of it. But yeah, we've had everything from classical to Egyptian qanun players and oud players and Indian, all that, the whole range. So I don't think we want to be pegged as one or the other. I think that's at least my take of it. And that's back then when I was more involved, what I always wanted to see. Eclectic, wide-ranging.
Original. Even
introducing music to an audience that has never heard it. To me, that's always been an important part too. We talk about the musicians a lot and the performers, but the thing that goes hand in hand with that is the audience. And the Blue Skies audience is without a doubt one of the best audiences in the world. They're incredibly receptive, supportive. They have the musician from that first note. Mm-hmm. And it's really quite something.
We were talking before we came over here about some of our favorite artists or musicians, and you just never know when that magic moment is going to happen. And it's true, we have a vast variety. It's also how the artistic director puts the lineup together and the magic that grows out of it. There was an experience last year where an artist was coming to play, and the day before, their accompanist came down with COVID. And she came on her own. She came anyway. She played anyway. And she went to a workshop that somebody else was running. And she went up to the person afterwards and said, I need help. Would you be willing to be my sound person, my side person tonight when I'm on the main stage? And the guy said, sure. And so they went off in the corner and practiced a little bit. And there he was on stage with her, performing her music that he'd never heard before. And it was a seamless, beautiful show. So these magic moments happen where you just don't know.
Connections get made.
And maybe one thing about the site and the stage, I think is important too for that special flavor that we have. Basically, the festival site, the performance area is a little bit of a bowl, amphitheater kind of effect. And the stage is only a couple of feet off the ground. There's not a big gap between the performers and the audience. I mean, the kids have to be taken off stage at times because they can easily climb onto the stage, and it all adds to it. And when you have a dance band in the evening when things get danceable, the crowd's right up to the stage. It isn't like there's an acre of distance between the performers and the audience. And that interaction, I think, is very important, and I think it affects the performances too, that direct connection.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, there is no separation between performers and audience. There's no snow fencing, there's no lines where people can't go, or, it's...
I was kind of assuming that by this point, just by how you've been describing it. Yeah.
And there's different camping areas, and although we recommend that people move around and try different areas, that people sometimes stay in the same kind of camping area, and they may then host a musical group who's never been camping before, or who doesn't speak English, or any number of things, and so a group of campers who are just regular folk coming to the festival will end up hosting some of the musicians as well. So it's very connected and interactive. Yeah.
You mentioned some attendees that don't speak English. How far do people come from to attend this?
As attenders or as musicians?
Either.
Yeah, I think typically it was seen as a local festival. Mm-hmm. At times, we've always actually had the problem that we had to turn people away. So, it's a matter of, I would say basically catchment would be Montreal to a little bit west of Toronto. North and south, obviously odd people coming from farther away. Mm-hmm. Same thing with musicians, because we don't pay travel. People have to find their own way there. So again, that limits it generally. We've had exceptions over the years of people coming from far away. But generally, it would be sort of Quebec, Ontario.
There always seems to be an exception, too, where somebody is from far away, like Australia or Cuba or Spain.
Yeah, we've had those, and that's always been great. The Brazilians at one time, weren't they an amazing band? Yeah. Holy smokes. Coming down the hill with the big drums and all that. We've had some amazing bands that kind of go over those, for quite a bit. Mm. Yeah.
Oskar made a point about we don't pay for transportation for the musicians, but I think it's important too to note, and maybe Dale can speak to it, is that we don't have a headliner performer that we pay $50,000 to, or anything like Mariposa or some of the larger festivals. I think it's important as a part of Blue Skies to explain a little bit about how we...
Yeah, we pay according to a scale that we establish. So we pay, so much for a solo performer, and then an additional amount for each side person, up to a maximum of a quintet. And although we don't pay for travel, we can occasionally help with travel. So, Stewart Park is a close festival of ours, a week away, and sometimes we can work to help make it possible for an artist to come, where they can do 2 or 3 weekends of festivals, and we can be part of it. We can't do the whole thing ourselves, but we can certainly assist.
Mm-hmm.
For anybody who might be interested in volunteering or participating, how do they get involved?
They get on the mailing list, first of all. They talk to their friends or somebody who's been to the festival. Oskar touched on the fact that we have to turn away more people than we have room for, than want to come. At one point, we used to just sell tickets at the door, and people could just come to the gate and buy a ticket and be guaranteed that they'd get entry. But now we turn away 4 out of 5 of the people who want to come to the festival. So we have a database, we have a mailing list. People get on that. It's mail list with 2 L's at blueskiesmusicfestival.ca, and they can get on the mailing list. The tickets are already confirmed for this year, so we're booked up for this year, but maybe for the 51st. So
anybody listening right now is going to have to wait for next year.
They're out of luck for this year, although there will be day passes available. Going to the Blue Skies website and just check out when they're usually available about July the 1st, and we have sort of layers of volunteering. So there are people who are committed and responsible for an area, and they're expected to come to meetings and to participate in the organizing committee. And then there are people who are dedicated to help them, and they get tickets to come to the festival, but they've been coming for a few years. And then people who are lucky enough to get tickets to come can come to the info booth and find an area that they'd like to volunteer in, and they can volunteer in a number of areas for a couple of hours a day or a couple of hours over the weekend, and hopefully get tickets the following year and come back and become more and more involved. But you can't just kind of show up and say, I want to volunteer.
So basically, I think they are predetermined volunteers.
Right.
And they are volunteers that are through the door first time or whatever, that yes, they can sign up for a shift to do all these things and to be taken care of. And they might prefer to do just that without ever really getting involved into the depths of the organization. But at the same time, without those volunteers that walk through the door, as you might call it, the festival couldn't run. Mm-hmm. It couldn't even run with the core of the predetermined volunteers, let's call them. We do need that input, that involvement of people that just show up and say, yes, I like to work at the gate, work, parking, work, all those areas that need to be covered in a big festival like that.
Now, before we started recording, I know we were cautious of all of us sort of running too long with this, because I know we all have a lot to say here, but with 50 years of this festival, I'm wondering if anybody has a story they would like to share.
Tons of stories. Yeah.
How did Magoo end up being the MC? Because he's a huge part of the festival.
Yeah, so we have an MC, Mr. Magoo, who's been doing that for a hell of a long time, but not from the start. Before that, again, it was one of those ad hoc things. Like when we started the festival, we had just put out this call, who knows musicians, and why don't you invite them to come? And so we did have people like Ken Whiteley showed up at the first festival, totally unorganized, there he is. And Stan Rogers showed up at the second festival. No contract or anything, that's what we're talking 74, 75, 76, where things were quite loose. So we, again, the emceeing was done by whoever was there. The guitar maker Grit Laskin, who turned out also to be a musician, emceed the first festival. I didn't know that. He didn't know it either, but somebody had to do it, and he was the one to do it, right? Then we had a fellow who was an actor who we actually asked to be the performer, the MC for a while. And right now, the name slips. I can't.
Howard Jerome.
Howard Jerome, who is an American actor from New York, then moved to Toronto and lived in Toronto all his life after that. And he happened to have friends who had a cottage in the neighborhood. So he's jumped in, and he was, amazingly good at this job. And then one day, this fellow walks in and says, "Hi, I'm Magoo. I like to, perform." And we said, we really don't have a spot for you anymore, because even then, the stage got filled up quite easily at the time. When we gave him the spot, and he did a totally amazing 3-song show that just blew us all away with his energy and his songs. He did a show for me the other day, and I had asked him to perform a song from back then, and that was a song that goes by, you got to do what you really want to do, and it was such an inspirational song, and it still is, part of what we're all about. So then next year we needed an MC, and Magoo and a friend of ours, Alan Weeks, who also performed in the neighborhood, they had a band, took on the emceeing job, and that's it. History was made, and it never changed. And he's been on there now as a solo MC and musician forever. And he's got that touch that is, again, fits the festival so incredibly well. He doesn't use formulaic kind of, and my best friend and blah, blah, blah kind of introductions. He finds that personal touch to connect the performer to the audience that is totally unique. I don't think there's anybody else who can do that.
No. One of the things that we could talk about Magoo all day, but one of the things that he does that everyone loves is we call the shower. the shower episode. We try to conserve water. We have a well, but it's finite, and we need to be very careful many years of conserving water. And we do have some cooling stations, but they're primitive. And so Magoo decided one year that we were really short on water, that he would demonstrate how to take a shower. And he does this on the main stage with a shower bucket and does a whole song and dance routine around taking a shower with just a bucket of water that demonstrates how to be conservative with water, but is also hilariously funny. And people make sure that they are finished supper in time to see the shower show. And
I mean, the fun is it's been repeated. It's like, the family thing is part of it, right?
Yes.
Not family, but like,
well,
we know the story. We know how it ends. But the variations of the theme are the ones that keeps it interesting. Right? It's been done so many times, but it's still, it adds that special little flavor. And again, having a stage that's close to the ground, he actually stands on the ground in front of the stage. It adds to that special flavor of the whole thing.
He's like a magnet, and he'll walk around. He does. There's also things grow over the years, and sometimes people will say, well, we've always done this. And the word always is absolutely hilarious, because no, it hasn't been always, but it's become a part of the experience every year. And on Sunday mornings, Magoo and Washboard Hank and whoever has a musical instrument, sometimes somebody comes with a bagpipe or accordion, and he juggles a parade at 10 o'clock in the morning all over the site of the festival. And there are hundreds of adults and children, all dressed in costumes, blowing on kazoos, walking all over the site just to greet the day. And
so why did it start?
Why did that start, Oskar? I don't know.
Well, there used to be musicians that would party all night long and keep people awake. And so the parade was a little bit of a revenge of the people who actually wanted to sleep in on Sunday morning and being woken up by 10 o'clock by this bunch of crazies walking through all the camping areas, every alley up and down, making a wonderful, joyous noise, was one way of like saying, hi guys, wake up, it's Sunday morning, let's have some fun.
I never knew that's why it started.
I mean, we have all aged quite a bit, and the days of playing all night long are kind of gone. Maybe there are still a few, yes, but it was not on the level it used to be. People would play, I remember quite a few, walking back home because I lived next to the site, with the sun way up already, So yes, it was part of this whole experience, because we can't do that without interfering with the neighbors, right? There's no neighbors. The festival in the middle of the woods, the next neighbor is way over, close to a kilometer away. And we generally give them free tickets so they will not complain.
Smart.
Of course.
So I find that fascinating, Oskar. So all these little pieces that we know parts of, but we don't know the background history to it, or we don't know how it started. And so that's part of the magic, too.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the future. It's been 50 years of blue skies. What can we expect from the next 50 years?
I think Magoo said it best at the 40th. And he at that time made the statement, it's not about 40 more years, it's about 40 more generations. We have challenges that many organizations would run from. Our organizational staff, by design, turns over 25% per year. So think of a company, every 4 or 5 years, we have a totally new group of people running it.
Almost.
But that has, in many ways, laid a bedrock of strength. We have a lot of bench strength, people who aren't actually, on point that year, but who know how to do the job. So I think that will serve us well moving forward.
Yeah. We started that way early on before this festival sort of gets codified and written in stone kind of thing. But we started that quite early on that we will, anybody who's part of the organization will change their job. Might take on another job, but certainly you cannot be artistic director for more than 3-4 years. You cannot, have certain positions of management, let's call them, longer than that. So there's a constant turnover, which is, also means in many ways reinventing the wheel too many times. But that renewal is quite important. Like any organization, we do have a problem of getting a little bit too long in the tooth. It's hard to find younger. I mean, when we started, I was 28, and I was the oldest guy on the block, right? There were a lot of people who were 21 and 22 and even 18, and they were all part of this first organizational team. You're hard-pressed to find people that are younger than 30 now that are involved in the organization of the festival.
And part of that is because some of us have to step aside.
That's why I've retired, because I'm, if you can listen to me and you know that I'm still very much involved with the festival, but at the same time, it was time I have no more, somebody needs to step back. And we might not even like the way the festival is now run and organized, and that's part of the process. We have to kind of figure, yes, whoever these younger generations are that are slowly taking over, positions of decision-making and running the festival, well, they're not our decisions anymore, and that's fine.
Yeah.
That's part of the strengths of the organization, too, that we can say that.
Mm-hmm. Some of the organizers, there's 3 generations involved in the organizing. It's awesome to see.
Yeah, that's a bit of a family thing going on, too.
Mm-hmm. I gathered, yeah.
Where the kids of the kids are running the show.
Yeah.
We try to stay with organizers being fairly close, reasonably close to the festival site. So you talked about the audience coming in from where. We try to have some kind of connection to the site, to the land throughout the year.
Oskar, Kate, Dale, thank you so much for coming in and telling us all about Blue Skies. This has been great.
Well, thank you, John.
Thank you.
This has been Kingston Live. We encourage you to rate us on your listening platform of choice and subscribe where possible. For show listings, artist info, and all things Kingston music, check out kingstonlive.ca. Voiceovers by Riley Jabor and John Sanfilippo. Writing and research by Peter Sanfilippo. Executive producer Rob Howard. Kingston Live is a member of the Canadian Live Music Association. We'd love to hear from you. Email us at podcast@kingstonlive.ca.